Every single insect has been dealing with some sort of metamorphosis. Because apparently the metamorphosis is like a life cycle whenever you have seen a bug that's been morphing into some other bug. Example though, when a caterpillar morphing into a butterfly just because it's been in a cocoon for a couple of days or whatsoever. But if you may not know, metamorphosis can happen to every single animal because it going through life cycles. But you should know there is some very interesting book about this life of a person who becomes a bug. Every single bug is like a part of fearness, but no matter what the bugs can do to you, sometimes they have convincing about the life form about the bugs. Sometimes it seems very much convenient, but everywhere you imagine, it just takes a lot more custody. So no matter what you've been hearing this tale, it's basically some sort of another fiction's book. It is basically about it. So without further hesitate, this is Metamorphosis, and its director, Franz Kafka. One morning, when Gregor Samsa woke from the terrible dream, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. He lay on his armor-like back, and if he lifted his head a little, he could see his brown belly, slightly domed and divided by arches into stiff sections. The bedding was hardly able to cover it, seems ready to side off any moment. His many legs painfully thin carpeted with the size of the rest of him, waved about helplessly as he looked. What happened to me, he thought. It wasn't a dream. His room, a proper human room, although a little too small, lay peacefully between its four familiar walls. A collection of detectable samples lay spread out on a table. Samsa was a traveling salesman, and above there hung a picture that he had recently cut out of an illustrated magazine and housed it in a nice galley frame. It showed a lady filled out with a fur hat and fur ball, who sat upright, raising a heavily fur muff that covered the whole of her lower arm towards the viewer. Gregor then turned to look out the window at the dull weather. Drops of rain he could hear hitting the pine, which made him feel quite sad. How about if I sleep a little bit longer and forget all this nonsense, he thought. But that was something he was unable to do because he was used to sleeping on his right. And in his present state, couldn't get into that position. However hard he threw himself onto his right, he always rolled back where he was. He must have tried it 100 times, shut his eyes so that he wouldn't have looked at the foundering legs, and only stomp when he began to feel the mild, dull pain that there had never felt before. Oh God, he thought, what a strenuous career it is that I've chosen. Traveling day in and day out. Doing business like this takes so much efforts than doing your own business at home. And then on top of that, there was a curse of traveling. Worries on making the train connections. Bad and irregular food. Contact with the different people all the time so that you can never get to know anyone or become friendly with them. It can all go to hell. He felt a slight inch up on his belly, pushed himself slowly up on his back towards the headboard so that he could lift his head better, found out where the itch was, and saw that it was covered with lots of little white spots which he didn't know what to make of. But when he tried to feel the place on one of his legs, he drew it quickly back and because as soon as he touched it, he had overcome by a cold shudder. He settled back into his former position. Getting up early all the time, he thought. It makes you stupid. If you got enough sleep, other traveling salesmen live a life in luxury. For instance, whenever I get back to the guest house during the morning to copy out the contract, these gentlemen were always still sitting. They're eating their breakfast. I ought to just try that with my boss. I got kicked out of a spot. But who knows? Maybe that would be the best thing for me. If I didn't have my parents to think about what I have given in my notice a long time ago, I have gone up to the boss and told him what I just think. Tell him everything I would. Let him know just what I feel. He fall right off his desk. And it's a funny sort of business to be sitting up there at your desk. Take it down a year of stubbornness from up there, especially when you have to go right up close because the boss is hard of hearing. Well, there's still hope. Once I've got the money together to pay off my parents' debt to him, another 5 or 6 years, I suppose. That's definitely what I'll do. That's when I'll make the big change. First of all, though, I got to get up. My train leaves at 5. And he looked over the alarm clock, ticking on his chest in the drawers. God in heaven, he thought. It was 6:30, and the hands were quickly moving forwards. It was even later than 7:30, more like 7:15. Had an alarm clock not rung? He couldn't see from the bed that it had been set to 4 o'clock as it should have been. It certainly must have been rung, yes, but it was possible to quietly sleep through the furniture rattling noise. True. He had not slept peacefully, but probably all the more deeply because of that. What should he do now? The next train went at 7. If he were to catch, that he would have a rush like a mad, and the collection of his samples was still not packed. And he did not feel particularly fresh and lively. And even if he did catch the train, he would not avoid his boss' anger as an office assistant would have been there to see the 5 o'clock train go. He would have been put in his reports about Gregor's not being there a long time ago. The office assistant was a boss man, spineless, and with no understanding. What about he reported sick? About that was extremely stunning and suspicious, as in the 15 years of service, Gregor had never once yet been ill. His boss would certainly come around with a doctor from the medical insurance company, accuse his parents of having a lazy son, and accept the doctor's recommendations and not to make any calm, as the doctors believed that no one was ever ill, but that many were weak, worshipfully. And what's more, he would have been entirely wrong in this case. Gregor did, in fact, apart from the excessive sleepiness after sleeping for so long, yet completely well and even felt hunger than usual. He was still hurriedly thinking all this through, unable to decide to get out of bed. When the clock struck 7:15, there was a contentious knock at the door near his head. Gregor, somebody called. It was his mother. "It's 7:15. Didn't you want to go somewhere?" That gentle voice, Gregor was shocked when he heard his own voice answering. It could hardly be recognized as a voice he had had before, as if from deep trouble him. There was a painful and uncontrollable squeaking mixed in with it. The words could be made out of at first, but then there was a sort of echo which made them unclear, leaving the hearer unsure whether he had heard properly or not. Gregor, he had wanted to give a full answer to explain everything, but in a circumstance contained himself was saying, "Yes, mother, thank you. I'm getting up now." The change in Gregor's voice probably could not have noticed outside through the window door, as his mother was satisfied with an explanation and snuffed away. But with the short conversation, made another members of the family aware that Gregor, against their exceptions, was still at home. But soon his father came knocking at once of the side of a door, gently with his fist. "Gregor, Gregor," he called. "What's wrong?" After a short while he called again with a warning deepness in his voice. "Gregor, Gregor." At the other side of the door was his sister. Came patiently. "Gregor, aren't you well? Do you need anything?" Gregor answered the book to both sides. "I'm ready now." Began an effort to remove all the strangeness from his voice by inclining very carefully and putting a long pauses between each individual words. His father went back to his breakfast, but his sister whispered, "Gregor, open the door, I beg you." Gregor, however, had no thought of opening the door. Instead of congratulating himself for his contagious habit, acquired from his traveling, of locking on all doors at night even when he has at home. The first thing he wanted to do was to get up in peace without being disturbed, and get dressed, and most of all, to have his breakfast. Only then he would consider what to do next. He as well aware that he would not bring his thoughts to any sensible conclusions by lying in his bed. He remembered that he had often felt a slight pain in bed, perhaps caused by lying awkwardly. But that was always to turn out to be the pure imagination, that he would wonder how his imaginings would slowly resolve themselves today. He did not have the slightest doubt that the change in his voice was nothing more than the first signs of a serious cold, which was occupational hazards for traveling salesmen. It was a simple matter to throw off the covers. He only had to blow himself up a little and they fell off by themselves. But it became difficult after that, especially when he was so exceptionally bored. He would have used his arms and his hands to push himself up, but instead of them, he only had all these legs continuously, moving in different directions, in which he was moved over, unable to control. If he wanted to bend one of them, then it was the first one that he would stretch himself out. And if he managed to do what he wanted with that leg, all the others seemed to be set free and would move about painfully. This is something that can't be done in bed, Gregor said to himself, so don't keep trying to do so. The first thing he wanted to do was to get lower part of his body out of the bed, but he had never seen the lower part and could not imagine what it would look like. It turned out to be hard to move. It went so slowly, and finally, almost in a frenzy, when he carelessly shoved himself forward with all the force he could gather, he chose the wrong directions and hit hard against the lower bedpost and learned from burning pain he felt all alone that the lower part of his body might will, at present, be the most sensitive. So then he tried to get to the top part of his body out of the bed, the first carefully turning his head to the side. This he managed quite easily, and despite its beneath and its weight, the bulk of his body eventually followed slowly in the direction of the head. But when he had at least got his head out of the bed and onto the fresh air, it occurred to him that he let himself fall. It would be a miracle if his head were not injured, so he becomes afraid to carry and push it himself forward the same way, and he could not knock himself out now at any price. Better to stay in bed than lose consciousness. It took as much effort to get back to where he had been earlier, when he lay there silently. But there was one watching his legs as they struggle against each other even harder than before. If that was possible, he could think of no way of bringing peace and order to this chaos. He told himself once more that it was not possible for him to stay in bed, and that was the most sensible thing to do. Would be great free in whatever, in the most way he could weather sacrifice. At the same time, though, he did not forget to remind himself that a calm consideration was much better than rushing to desperate conclusions. At times like this, he would direct his. Unfortunately, even the other side of a narrow street was enveloped in a morning fog, and the view had a little confidence or cheer to offer him. 7 o'clock already, he said to himself. Then the clock struck again, 7 o'clock, and there's still a fog like this. And he lay there quietly a little longer, breathing lightly, as if he perhaps expected the total stillness to bring things back to their real and natural state. But then he said to himself, before it strikes 7:15, I'll definitely have to get properly out of bed. And by then somebody will come around from work and ask what happened to me, as well as they open up at work before 7 o'clock. and so he set himself a task of swinging an entire length of his body out of the bed at the same time. If he succeeded in falling out of the bed in this way and kept his hand raised as he did, so he could probably avoid injuring it. His back seems quite hard, and probably nothing would happen to it falling into the carpet. His main concern was for the loud noise he was bound to make, and which, even though all the doors were probably raised concerns if not alarm. But this was something that had to be a risk. When Gregor was already stuck and halfway out of the bed, the new method was more of a game than an effort. All he had to do was rock it back and forth. It occurred to him how simple everything would be if somebody came to help him. Two strong people. He had his father and a maid in mind. He would have been more than enough. They would only have pushed their arms under the thumb of his back, peel him away from the bed, bend down from the load, and then be patient and careful as he swung over onto the floor where, hopefully, the little legs would find a use. Should we really call for help, though, even apart from the fact that all the doors were locked? Despite all the difficulty he was in, he could not suppress a smile at this thought. After a while, he had already moved so far across that it would have been hard for him to keep his balance if he rocked too hard. It was now past 10 already. It referred to 7:10. And he would make it a final decision very soon. Then there was a ring at the door of the flat. That would be someone at work, he said to himself, and froze very still, although his little legs only become all the more lively and dance around. For a moment, everything remained quiet. Dare not open the door, Gregor said to himself, caught in some non-consensual hope. But then, of course, the maid firm steps went into the door as ever and opened it. Gregor only needed to hear the visitor's first words of greeting. He knew who it was. The chief clerk himself. Why did Gregor have to be the only one could deem to work for the company, where they immediately have become highly suspicious at the sightless shortcoming, where all the employees, every one of them louts, was there not one of them who was faithful and devoted, would go so mad with pangs of conscience that he couldn't get out of his bed if he didn't spend at least a couple of hours in the morning on a company business. Was it really not enough letting one of the trainees make inquiries? Assuming inquiries were even necessary, did the chief clerk have to come himself? And did they have to show the whole innocent family that this wasn't so suspicious that only the chief clerk would be trusted to have the wisdom to investigate it? And more because of the thoughts had made him upset, even though any paper decision. He swung himself with all his force out of the bed. There was a loud thump, but it wasn't really loud noise. His fall was so softened a little by the carpet, and Gregor back so more elastic than he had thought, which made the sound muffled and not too noticeable. He had not held his head very carefully enough, though it hit him as he fell, annoyed and in pain. He turned and rubbed it against the carpet. Something's fallen down there, said Chief Clark in the room on the left. Gregor tried to imagine whether something of the sort that had happened to him today could ever happen to the chief clerk too. You had a concert that it was possible. But that's even a gruffer reply to this question. The chief clerk's warm footsteps in his highly polished boots could now be heard in an adjoining room. From the room to his right, Gregor's sister whispered to him and to let him know. Gregor, chief clerk is here. Yes, I know, said Gregor to himself, but without daring to raise his voice loud enough to his sister to hear him. Gregor, said his father now from the room to his left. The chief clerk has come around and wants you to know why you didn't leave on an early train. We don't know what to say to him. And anyways, he wants to speak to you personally. So please open this door. I'm sure he'll be good enough to forgive the untidiness of your room. Then the chief clerk called. Good morning, Mr. Samsa. He isn't well, said to his mother to the chief clerk, while his father continued to speak through the door. He isn't well, please believe me. Why else would Gregor have missed the train? The lead only ever thinks about the business. It nearly makes me cross the way. He never goes out in the evenings. He's been in the town for a week now, but staying home every morning, every evening. He sits with us in the kitchen and just reads the papers and studies train timetables. His idea of relaxation is working with espresso. He made a little frame, for instance. It only took him 2 or 3 evenings. You'll be amazed how nice it is. It's hanging up in this room. You'll see it as soon as Gregor opens the door. Anyways, I'm glad you're here. We wouldn't have been able to get Gregor to open this door by ourselves. He's so stubborn. And I'm sure he is well. He said this morning that he is, but he isn't. I'll be there in a moment, said Gregor slowly and thoughtfully, but without him moving, so that he would not miss any word of conversation. Well, I can't think of any other way of explaining it. Mrs. Samsa said to chief clerk, I hope it's nothing serious. But on the other hand, I must say that if people to Khmer's ever become slightly unwell, then fortunately or unfortunately, as you like, we simply have to overcome it because of business considerations. Can the chief clerk came in to see you? Now then, his father impatiently knocking at the door again. No, said Gregor. In his room, on his right, there followed a painful silence. In his room, on his left, sister began to cry. So why his sister not go and join him? Or join the others? She has probably only just got up and had not even begun to get dressed. Why was she crying? Was it because he had not got up and not had to let the chief clerk in? Because he was in danger of losing his job. And if that happened, his boss would once more pursue her parents with the same demands as before, but with no need to worry about things like that yet. Gregor was still out there and had not the slightest intention of abandoning his family.